So last year, I made a video going over the 2021 Stack Overflow Developer Survey, but we didn't go over the results. This year, I forgot to fill out the survey, but we are going to take a look at the results. Being in the software development industry, it's good to be caught up with all the latest trends, just with how rapidly things change. New frameworks popping up, older languages dying out. So we're going to go through each section, see what the popular languages are, and see if there's any interesting things going on. I'm not going to go through every single graph, otherwise this video would be like 2 hours long, but we are going to go over the important ones. So it seems like there are 9 sections here. One section is the developer profile. We have 5 sections on technology and then a few sections on work and productivity. For developer profile, learning to code online increased from 60 to 70% year over year, which is a pretty big jump. Respondents older than 45 years old are more likely to have learned from books, but it just seems like learning from books is slowly, or I guess quickly, becoming a thing of the past, especially with all the new online resources popping up. Obviously, you have YouTube, which is free, but you also have things like Udemy and Pluralsight, which have very cheap but good courses. 88% of people like to learn through technical documentation. 86% are through Stack Overflow, which I wouldn't really consider Stack Overflow a place to learn how to code. At least for me, what I use it for is if I'm ever stuck on anything, I'd use it to get help. But ideally, I do recommend looking at technical documentation first. And then if you still need help, then I usually go to things like how-to videos. Years coding here, it says similar to last year, 50% of respondents have been coding for 10 years or less. So it seems like 10 years is about the median, which is actually, I just hit the 10-year mark. If you haven't seen my video, I talk about my 10-year journey through learning to code, but it seems like most people, 29%, are in that 5 to 9 year range. If we look at gender, 92% of all respondents are male. Crazy stat. It's not surprising, but I mean, 5% women. So to the 10 women that are watching this video, the opportunity is there. If you can even become a proficient developer, companies are going to be fighting over you. So if you want to talk about ultimate job security, I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. All right, let's take a look at the different technologies. So if we want to look at programming, scripting, and markup languages, I mean, there's no surprise. JavaScript is by far the most popular. Here it says 2022 marks JavaScript's 10th year in a row as the most commonly used programming language, which, I mean, I don't see it slowing down at all. Over the next 10 years, if I were to put my money on whether I think JavaScript would be the most commonly used, I would probably put my money on it, which also makes me kind of rethink. Usually when people ask me what programming language they should learn first, I usually tell them Python. But now that I think about it, I might have to start telling people that to learn JavaScript first. It's not just for front-end users. Obviously, if you're a front-end user, you're going to be using JavaScript. But just with how good Node is now, I mean, there's no reason not to learn JavaScript first. So I might have to reconsider my advice. Obviously, SQL, if you want to do any type of backend persistent storage, you're going to be using SQL. We see Python is 4th. Python, Java, and then C# are the top 3 outside of JavaScript, the top 3 languages, which is no surprise. And then it's just kind of spread out between the different languages. If we look at databases, we see MySQL, Postgres, and SQLite are the top 3, and then MongoDB, which I remember like 8 to 10 years ago when NoSQL was kind of, on the come up. Everyone was saying NoSQL is going to replace SQL. SQL is going to be obsolete in 10 years. Well, here we are. SQL is still king. And it's more about your use case on which one to use. NoSQL is generally better for speed and scalability. So it seems like it's more just based on what you need. All right, cloud platforms. AWS remains the most used cloud platform with over 50% of people using it. And then you have Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud. I mean, these are really the 3 big players in the space. And either one of them, you're going to be getting something secure and reliable and scalable. If we look at the most popular web frameworks and technologies, we see Node is number 1. We see React and jQuery at number 3. I know jQuery has kind of fallen off a bit over the years, but it seems like, a lot of people still use it. And then down here, after React, we have Angular and Vue, which are probably the 2 most popular JavaScript front-end frameworks. If we scroll further down, we see .NET and .NET Core, which Django and Flask, which are the 2 most popular Python web frameworks. They're almost identical, it's kind of rare. You don't really see that. Usually there's like a dominant framework per language, but with Python, it seems like it's pretty evenly split. The most popular IDEs, we have Visual Studio Code. overwhelmingly number one, which I kind of wish they would split this section up more because I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think Visual Studio Code is more of an IDE or is it more of just a text editor? Like here, Notepad, I consider that, and Vim, I consider those to be more like text editors, and then something like Visual Studio or IntelliJ to be more like IDEs. So I kind of wish this section here was more split up, but really no surprises here. And it kind of just depends on what you're using, right? It's more language specific. If you're using C#, you're probably going to be using Visual Studio. If you're using Java, you're probably going to be using IntelliJ. All right, so let's go to the most loved, dreaded, and wanted programming languages. So we see that loved is number one is Rust overwhelmingly. I've actually never used Rust, but I've noticed that it kind of has a cult-like following. I don't know if it's really that much better than every other language. Even when I did a video ranking programming tiers, people were upset that I left out Rust. And I was like, in the video, I state that I'm only ranking languages that I've used before. So it seems like you can't really say anything bad about it. But I don't know. I've never used it, so maybe it is by far the best language ever made. So we see a lot of the popular languages ranked high. I've only heard bad things about Delphi, so I'm surprised that it's ranked so high. If we go down to the worst languages, we see things like MATLAB, COBOL, Visual Basic, Objective-C. I've never used these, but again, haven't heard great things about them. If we look at the most loved web frameworks and technologies, here it says Phoenix overtakes SvelteSpot as the most loved web framework. I've actually never even heard of Phoenix. So if we go to Wikipedia, Phoenix is a web development framework written in Elixir. Okay, I've never used Elixir. I don't know. I've never heard of it, but apparently it's very popular. All right, next up we have other tools. The desire to start using Docker does not appear to be slowing down as Docker increased from 30% to 37% this year. So Docker and Kubernetes are gaining popularity. I'm actually working on a project that is going to be using Docker. So it seems like containerized applications are becoming a thing of the future. And I'm still new to it, but it's definitely something that I'm learning and want to be proficient at. So for version control systems, no other technology is as widely used as Git. We see 93% of all respondents use Git in some form. I was thinking about it. Git is the only tool that pretty much every tech company uses. Some of them might use Subversion and Git. The only reason I would think of not using Git is if you're an older company and you started with Subversion and you're kind of stuck on it. So if you're someone who's learning how to code, even if you're working on just like a side project or something like that, I highly recommend using Git just so you get more exposure to it. It seems like most people use the command line with version control systems, which is kind of surprising. I've always used some kind of GUI. When I work with Git, I used to use SourceTree, and now I really like using Fork. Or most IDEs nowadays, Visual Studio, IntelliJ have their own dedicated version control application, or it's built into the IDE itself. All right, let's talk about work trends here. So if we look into work status, we see that 85% of developers say their organizations are at least partially remote, which I'm almost gonna say has probably grown over the last couple of years with people being forced to work from home and companies just not going back to fully in person. But I feel like a lot of places have gone to a hybrid kind of, some remote, some in person. And it seems like it doesn't really grow based on the size of the company, which is kind of surprising. You would think smaller companies with like 2 to 9 people they'd be fully remote just because they're probably trying to save costs. But besides having just one person working, probably like a freelancer, seems like it doesn't really change based on the size of the company. Here it talks about salary by developer type. Not going to go too much into this one just because there's so many varying factors depending on location, depending on the company that you work for, the field that you're in. The salaries can vary widely based on those factors. People coding outside of work. It's interesting that there are 73% of people who code outside of work as a hobby. Seems kind of high, especially just the people that I know usually don't do a lot of coding outside of work because, you're pretty much at work like all day writing code. But the more I think about it, it's like the people that would actually fill out this survey would be the kind of people that do code outside of work. So not fully surprised there. All right, and finally we have the participants. 73% of the people that filled out the survey are professional developers, and then less than 10% are everything else. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll leave a link down to the results. There's a lot that I didn't go over. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.